Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Shul Jewish Cultural Community, and Atheists United Studios. You know, Joey, at their core, film and television are vehicles for storytelling. And they must be good at what they do, sometimes more so than other times, because over 500,000 feature-length movies have been produced. Over 800,000 different television programs are now available on streaming and traditional TV platforms. And this doesn't include the countless projects that never get made. To date, Americans have consumed over 15 million years worth of streaming content. This is all the more remarkable given that, according to some, there are only 7 basic narrative plots. 7 plots told and retold literally millions of times. To make a memorable mark in this crowded field even once is a great triumph. To do so more than once is truly extraordinary. It makes you a legend, like today's guest.
We are thrilled to have with us Michael Elias, an award-winning actor and director, writer, who has written film, television, theater, and fiction. You may know Michael as the co-screenwriter of The Frisco Kid, starring Gene Wilder and Harrison Ford, or The Jerk, starring Steve Martin, both from 1979. He also created the hit sitcom Head of the Class, which ran on ABC from 1986 to 1991. More recently, he has turned to writing novels, including You Can Go Home Now, published by HarperCollins in 2020. Michael Elias, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here. I hope I can be amusing.
Who knows, maybe we'll amuse you.
Okay, great. Let's go.
Yeah. I don't know too much about you. Would you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and early years? How did you get started in writing?
I was born and raised in a small Catskill mountain village called Woodburn, about 100 miles from New York. It was Jewish in the summer and not so Jewish in the winter. It was full of hotels, bungalow colonies. There was another thing called Kuchelanes, which was, I guess, a bungalow colony. And then at Labor Day, it returned to more of an agricultural. There were chicken farms, dairy farms, and in my town, a state prison. But the summer was the exciting time, and I loved to. Well, I worked in the hotels as soon as I was able. Probably around the age of 14, I started working as a bellhop, as a busboy, and eventually a waiter. But what I really loved were the shows in the hotels and the casinos, they called, which were, and there were comedians and singers and folk singers, and that gave me a real affection, or determined that I somehow I wanted to be a performing or writing artist, and that was kind of the impetus. Then I went to college, and after college I moved to New York and decided to become an actor, and I worked in off Broadway and off Broadway theaters and coffee shops, and did plays. I also sidelined, and that became a real career, as a comedian. I had a comedy team, Frank Shaw and myself. It was called Elias and Shaw, and we were moderately successful. We toured as an opening act for rock and roll acts, singers. We opened for the Turtles. We played nightclubs, and we also did Johnny Carson. And we were seen by a producer in Hollywood, and he called us and said, "Who writes your material?" And we said, "We do." He said, "Well, would you like to come to Hollywood and be comedy writers?" And we said, "Yeah, that sounds great." what about the act? And he said, not interested. So in the tradition of show business, we gave up the act and we came to Hollywood and became writers. And that was in 1970. We wrote variety shows, Glenn Campbell, Smothers, Leslie Uggams. And at the same time, we had an idea for a movie. And we can talk about this later, but the movie was The Frisco Kid. And we wrote it and it was produced. And that kind of propelled us. And then we split up, but I started writing more screenplays. I met and teamed up with a fellow named Rich Eustace, and we became writing and producing partners, and we went on to have a career writing the sitcoms, and we got lucky, and one of them was Head of the Class, ran for 5 years. Then I did some more work in television, but I could feel a divorce coming on. I was leaving television, and television was leaving me, and I started writing novels and plays, and that's where I find myself now, the author of 2 published novels, one ready to go out to editors, and I'm working on one at the same time. Okay, that's it in a nutshell.
Well, thank you so much.
That was a big nutshell. I just took a deep breath and we were that. Okay.
Oh, that's all great information. I'm wondering, first of all, I assume that when you're writing a novel, there's that luxury and that really blessing of being able to control every word in there, as opposed to screenwriting, where I know the initial idea, then the first draft, then by the time it hits the screen, it can often be a very different project. And as a screenwriter, I wonder if you can kind of take us through the process of screenwriting and how those changes and what the writer's involvement is, because there are so many hands, not to mention directors and producers and everyone else involved in that process.
There are 2 versions, I suppose. One is that you write a screenplay and God help you. You are now owned, or it is owned if you sell it. Writing it is good. Selling it sometimes can be a punishment for something you did in the first grade and you'll never remember what it was. But selling it means that they own it. And the they is a studio. The they includes a director, studio executives, and stars. And it becomes, in a way, it becomes like a ball that everybody wants to play with. And every once in a while, they will say, it's my ball, and we're not playing with you anymore, so you go home. But you go home with money.
Right.
So that's the good thing about screenwriting. You would be naive to think that you would have control of the screenplay that you wrote. And the only way to have control is to also direct it. There are really 2 good jobs in Hollywood, director and movie star, because everything else is you're kind of in service and at the mercy of. And if you're lucky, you can have a collaboration with a director. As a writer, you can have a collaboration. The world has changed significantly with streamers and series, because streamers and series is where the writer has the control. And everybody knows, David Simon in The Wire. I don't know if you can tell me who directed any of those episodes. And the reason streaming series are run by what they call showrunners, and they have real control of their material, is because you need them. That you really need them to write the pilot, the first episode, the second episode, the third, and so forth. So there's a whole new world of writers becoming more important in Hollywood than directors. And these television, I mean, I have to say, television directors are great. If you watch series, you say, wow, they're really good. But it's the writer who's important.
On a related front, there's an old adage, write what you know. So is there an autobiographical component in the things that you write?
Yes, probably in everything. I wrote and directed a movie called Lush Life about two jazz musicians, Forrest Whitaker and Jeff Goldblum and Kathy Baker. And somebody said, which one are you? And I said, Kathy Baker, because she, in the film, she was a high school teacher, and I was a high school teacher. So I gave her my life. I was not a jazz musician, so I couldn't, but I was able to put a lot of my life in her. And I think all writers do that. It could be a little bit of your life. It doesn't have to be your whole autobiography, but yes, you're a writer, your life comes in handy.
And that's true for Head of the Class as well. I read that that's sort of based on your high school teaching.
Yeah, it's flattering. I mean, I was a high school, junior high school, elementary school teacher. I never had or I rarely had as a substitute. I would go in because that would finance my acting career, lack of a career. Everybody had a day job. So you could drive a cab, you could be a waiter, or you could be a substitute teacher. And that was really great. So I was a substitute teacher, and in the New York City schools, I went all over, but my main school was on the Lower East Side on East 6th Street. In Avenue B. Anyway, it wasn't my idea to do Head of the Class. It was ABC. It was a really smart executive who invited me and my partner, Rich Eustace, for a drink. And he said, we would like to do a show about high school. And you guys do it. And Rich, who is really smart, Rich said, okay, but we want to make it about smart kids. We don't want to make it about what were the shows then? What was the one with John Travolta?
Welcome Back, Kotter.
Welcome Back, Kotter. We wanted really sharp kids, and he said that's great. So that's how Head of the Class got it, and I could bring a lot of my experience in high school, teaching in New York City or high school. I could bring a lot of experience to that, but I have to say it was created.
We spoke before at length about the Frisco Kid. We can certainly make that link available to the interview, which is on YouTube, to our audience. I was actually wondering about another Western that you co-wrote with Frank Shaw. That would be Black Bart, the pilot episode of the never-made Blazing Saddles spinoff. And you may be aware that there are a lot of internet rumors about that particular project, why it was made, why it was canceled. Are there missing episodes floating out there in an archive somewhere? What can you tell us about any of that? Maybe you can set the record straight.
Oh, well, I don't know what the record is that I have to set straight, but I'm sure curious. I hope you will tell me. That sounds great. We were assigned to write it at Warner Brothers. Basically, it was our adaptation of Blazing Saddles. We wrote a pilot. I mean, it's the same characters. Not Gene Wilder. I'm sorry.
Steve Landesberg.
Steve Landesberg played the Cincinnati Kid or whatever he was, and who was the
Louis Gossett Jr.
Lou Gossett. Yeah. So we did it. We did our version, and we were supposed to, I know we wrote about and had other writers come in, and we wrote 6 more episodes. I think 6. We made the pilot, and it wasn't aired and it wasn't picked up. I don't know why. I have no idea. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
It works, and Lou was great, and Steve Landisberg, he was wonderful.
It is available on the Blazing Saddles DVD as an extra. That's how I came to know of it. There is some really funny stuff in there, like Black Bart calling his white horse Whitey. That there must have been something there.
My favorite line is when he says to him, Steve Landisberg, he says, "You remember?" He says to Lou Gossett, he says, "Did you know a restaurant in Atlanta called Auntie May's? It was so good." And Lou Gossett says, "Well, not really. It was very hard for a slave to get a reservation."
Yeah, the humor is great, and just like Blazing Saddles, which I rewatched with Joey actually not too long ago, I think a lot of that humor still holds up really well, and the implicit kind of Jewish-Black alliance between the two protagonists, not called Jewish, but both in the film and the pilot are obviously Jewish people playing these characters. I think that's very relevant for today and something that I think is ripe for a review, and there's a really important and powerful message in that.
We never heard from Mel or anybody. It was weird. I don't. But what were some of the rumors or the intrigue? You got me going here. What were they?
So as I'm recollecting, basically, this was something that Warner Brothers did so they could retain the rights for the movie. Basically, Blazing Saddles, a property they intended to maybe make a sequel or make it into a series of films, and Mel Brooks put it in the contract. Well, if you don't make something immediately, then it's mine. So they quickly made the pilot, and then the rumor is that there are a number of episodes that were just filmed so that they could prove that they were working on it. I think that all of this is bogus.
Yes.
Yeah, that's my.
There was only one film, but we did write 6 more scripts. I don't know what happened to them. They were pretty good, but we did write.
Man,
scripts. I don't know.
I wish I could get my hands on those. That would be fun.
Maybe your next streaming project. You never know.
Find it.
Yeah.
I think, and Jonathan's just started to allude to this, I think this is going to be one of our kind of mainstay questions on the show. But you're a legend. So Jewishness and Jewish identity seem to play an important role in your work, both when they're central, as in the Frisco Kid, and when they're more subtle, as in the social consciousness of Head of the Class. So long story short, well, it's as long as you want it to be. Do you consider yourself a Jewish writer?
Yeah, I do. And I don't think I want to spend a lot of time that is normally devoted to articles in journals or not yours, Jonathan, but the Jewish writers, Saul Bellow, Philip Roth, so forth and go on. But I those guys are giants to me, and I aim to be them as a young aspiring writer. I loved them, and also women. I mean, Grace Paley to me is one of my heroines. I think she's fantastic. So yeah, I want to be known as a Jewish writer. That's fine with me.
Yeah, and you certainly. I know that you sent me a draft anyway of your upcoming book, Bender Sees the Elephant, which is autobiographical, as we've been talking about, and also there's some great Jewish content in there, very funny, and I think the way you described it, loosely based on real experiences. The names change sometimes only slightly, that kind of thing. What can you tell us about that story? What that book's all about.
Well, it's about a Hollywood writer in the 70s and 80s who comes from New York, where he and with his wife, and they're there. They land in Hollywood in 1970, about the same time. Only it's there's a war. The Vietnam War is going on. It's Nixon. It's racism. It's feminism. So even though it's comic, a lot of it, where you have the hero is a sitcom writer, and his wife is a kind of member of the Weather Underground. And how do you and where his sympathies lie? But he's writing sitcoms at ABC, and she's planning, I don't know, maybe a bank bombing, or an ROTC bombing. So it involves both worlds. And he's Bender, the hero, is sometimes I describe it as, well, it's like Larry David with politics. And at one point he plays. Well, let me say it's kind of autobiographical, that most of the stories are true, but I changed the names or made it fictional so I could tell the truth, because I'm not brave enough to write write a memoir where I really talk about stuff. So I prefer to fictionalize it. Abby Hoffman is in it, and Sterling Hayden, and there's a thinly disguised Michael Elias. Maybe he'll sue me. That would be great. Who else? Sometimes a couple of friends have read it and said I recognized everybody. That's okay, but you don't have to really know Hollywood to like it, I think. Anyway, and the Jewishness part is, he finally meets a wonderful woman at the end, because he's divorced and his wife leaves him, and she's Sephardic, and there's a whole thing about the not the clash, but him waking up to a Sephardic family, and he loves it.
Have you experienced the Sephardic Ashkenazic kind of clashes in your own experience? I think it's more probably prevalent in your generation than mine.
I claimed to be Sephardic at one point. I thought I could, because Elias is not an Ashkenazi name. It's so in this attempt to get Spanish or Portugal, citizenship, I was going to make the case that I'm a descendant of Sephardic Jews who were exiled from Spain, went to Salonika, and then made their way up to Hungary, where they ended up in a little town in Hungary called Belki, where they were all exterminated. So, and I think that makes sense to some degree, that I'm not. Anyway, that was that. So, just as I said, Elias is not Sephardic. In Hungarian, it's Ilyas. So, anyway.
Interesting. It must be kind of tiring to have to mention the Frisco Kid all these years later. Is that something that you find, like, because I know your feelings about the film, and that's probably what everyone wants to talk to you about still. Is that sort of a sore subject, or something you're okay with?
Oh yeah, I'm fine. I mean, you went a long way in kind of making me feel better. I mean, that was really life. It was great.
I appreciate that.
It was really something, because you got it. I mean, when you read the original, it's I when I tell people about it, I said it's this is a screenwriter's wet dream, man. To have somebody read the original and say how it was better than the one that was made. That's.
I would say the Frisco Kid is still the only really Jewish Western.
I'll tell you something. Steven Spielberg's mother had a restaurant.
Yeah.
The Milk and Honey or something?
Milky Way.
Milky Way. So I went there, and one night or day I used to go there, and she found out I wrote the Frisco Kid. She came over and says, "Oh my God, you wrote the Frisco Kid." She said, "That's my favorite movie." Don't tell Steven.
Well, that must have been something. I mean, that's nice to hear.
Yeah, I don't. Frisco doesn't make me feel. As I told you, I'm glad that there is one. I'm glad that Jews like it. I mean, it makes me happy. I don't. No.
No hard feelings.
No.
Would you consider Frisco Kid a revisionist Western, or is it kind of its own thing?
No, I don't. What do
Because
you,
there is that element of like correcting the record, the historical record, right?
well, you can see it in I mean, there's that scene which, because I always love, not love, but there's always, when there's the bank robbery scene, and I don't know whether it's in the movie or in the screenplay. There's a bank robbery, and the sheriff runs into the bar and says, "Okay, let's go get him. Let's get him." And the guys in the bar say, "Well, why? I don't have any money in the bank. I'm
Yeah,
not
exactly.
risking my life, for the bank." And he says, "Well, how about $10 a man?" He says, "Make it 20." Anyway, I thought that was kind of revisionist, and I thought
Yeah,
at least it was a reply to a trope. We need a posse.
yeah,
But I don't. And also, again, I mean, confused between the original, my screenplay or our screenplay, and what ended up was that it, as we kept saying to Gene Wilder, and I kept, I told you, I said, Gene, they didn't send for a gunfighter, they sent for a rabbi, and he wanted to make that's, basically the line. He wanted to make a cowboy movie, and we wanted to make a movie about Jews who come to the West, and about the making of an American Jew. That was what was really important to us.
yeah. I think even showing that there were Jews in the West is itself a revisionist thing.
Yeah, probably.
Highlighting, and I think even particularly in the original screenplay, the interactions between Jews and Native Americans and stuff like that, which didn't make it into the film in any sophisticated way. That kind of stuff is really what would what would have appealed to audiences seeking to see Westerns done differently, and to kind of touch on contemporary issues of race relations and stuff like that. But none of that really happens in the movie, unfortunately.
One thing to look at is, I don't know if you saw it, is Elvis Mitchell's documentary. It's called Black Enough for You. I think it's called Black Enough. It's Elvis Mitchell, who is he has a radio show on KCRW called The Treatment. And it's a documentary about films in the 70s, and from the point of a black kid or a black, saying, and where am I in these? Where am I in the movies? And when I see myself in the movies, am I, embarrassed? Am I relating to it? Whatever. And of course, he said, I never saw us as cowboys. And he says, right. At one point he says, and they show a lot of scenes in movies, and they show train, porters in trains. And he says, and they're in black tie. And he said, growing up, seeing people in black tie was embarrassing to me, because I reflected on that back to seeing those movies. So it's a good. So I he's a friend of mine. So I wrote to him. We write, and I told him I had the same experience, which led me to do the Frisco Kid, of not seeing ourselves in movies. And I don't know, your knowledge of Jews and movies is much more than mine. How we were either invisible, or how negatively were we portrayed. Probably nowhere near as close as black people were.
So what about your other work that you're doing now? You mentioned You Can Go Home Now, your other novel that came out a couple years ago, and maybe some other projects.
Well, I have two. I'm working on another novel, a thriller. Takes place in Maui, and the heroine's husband is a scuba instructor, and there's a night dive. It's called Night Dive, and there's a storm, and everybody comes out of the ocean except him. So the mystery is what happened to him. But I'm also working on and have been working for a long time, and this project is very old. I say it's old enough to drink in New Jersey. It's about Christopher Marlowe, based on Anthony Burgess's last novel. And Christopher Marlowe as an Elizabethan playwright. And the interesting thing about his life was that in order to become a playwright, because he didn't have a patron, he made a deal with the English Secret Service to be a spy. So you have a playwright who's a spy. He was also gay, and openly so. Probably you can make that judgment based on reading his plays, or you can take Burgess's word for it. But that's the way I wrote it. So I wrote it as it's now a television pilot with additional episodes, and I'd like to get that going. And that's mostly what I'm working on.
It's great that you're staying active, and I wonder if you feel that at this point in your life and career, you can be a little more picky and a little more, I don't know, I don't want to say thoughtful, but more in charge of the kinds of projects that you do?
Well, I think if asked, I would write a Bugs Bunny, but nobody's asking me. So I have to, I have to plant my own trees, and it's double-barreled because I grew up in Hollywood, as it were. I mean, I spent 40, 50 years, a lot of those years in demand. And then I wasn't in demand anymore. And that's a tough one. I'm really lucky that I have some, I don't know, gene or something that said, okay, move on, but I move on, and I write novels, and I write whenever I can. But I still drive by 20th Century Fox and I see a poster for a television show and say, hey, how come I'm not on that show? And I don't know, it could be a dopey show about country music, but it's something that no matter what, you always feel like I'd like somebody to want me. I guess maybe that's the thing. But the truth of the matter is, I don't want to. I mean, if you said, okay, we got you a job on, a sitcom, you're going to be, a showrunner or whatever, I would run in horror. What do you mean? Go to work every day? I don't think so. Anyway, that's.
Well, we've really enjoyed having you on our program, Michael Elias. And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.